If you've ever been to Knott's Berry Farm theme park in Southern California, you probably recognize this steam locomotive. This is Denver and Rio Grande Western number 340, a little narrow gauge C19 class locomotive built way back in 1881 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works. Back then, it was numbered 400 and burned coal for fuel rather than the oil that now provides sustenance for the engine's firebox. It was built with a set of 2 pilot wheels and 8 driving wheels and was primarily used to pull freight trains in Colorado and New Mexico. Eventually, the Rio Grande purchased larger locomotives and the 340 was demoted to branch line service, finishing off its career in Montrose, Colorado in 1951, some 70 years after it was built. From there, it caught the eye of a one Walter Knott, who was in the midst of procuring a collection of narrow-gauge rail equipment. Walter wanted to build a replica Old West town, complete with a railroad, to entertain guests visiting his boysenberry farm and restaurant in Buena Park, California. So, he purchased the 340, brought it back to Southern California, converted it to burn oil, and debuted it on his Ghost Town and Calico Railroad in 1952 as one of the first attractions at Knott's Berry Farm theme park. And the rest, as they say, is history. Growing up in Southern California, I had a number of my own experiences with the 340. I saw it many times over the years visiting Knott's Berry Farm, and it quickly became one of my favorite narrow-gauge locomotives. It even spurred my interest in the narrow-gauge railroads of Colorado as a whole. So you may have noticed by now that this very clearly isn't Southern California, and the questions that naturally follow are, where on earth is the 340 and why isn't it at Knott's Berry Farm? 340 has operated in a clockwise circle around Knott's Berry Farm for nearly 75 years. During that time, the locomotive has been well cared for by the park, but it was in need of a major overhaul. In 2024, Knott's contracted with the folks at the Durango and Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad out in Durango, Colorado to completely rebuild the 340. The park had previously contracted with Durango to rebuild their other steam locomotive, Rio Grande Southern number 41, which just so happens to be another C19 class locomotive. 340 was loaded onto a truck in early 2024 and left the theme park for the first time since arriving there in the 1950s. In the 2+ years that followed, the locomotive was completely stripped down and thoroughly rebuilt one component at a time. Finally, in the spring of 2026, 340 was nearing the end of its rebuild in Colorado. Now, in its own right, the Durango and Silverton is an incredible railroad, with 45 miles of original Rio Grande rail line through the mountains and river valleys of southwestern Colorado. 340 undoubtedly operated over these rails many times in years past. Recognizing the history and this incredibly unique opportunity, the Durango and Silverton worked with Knott's to offer a few public excursions with the 340 back on home rails before it returned to the theme park for several more decades of pulling passengers on the Ghost Town and Calico. If viewing the 340 running in Colorado for the first time in 3/4 of a century is something you'd like to see, welcome aboard, because we're heading once again back to Durango. Through the magic of teleportation, we arrive back in Durango, Colorado in early June of 2026. My original plan was to arrive into Durango the day prior to the first public excursions. However, on a hunch that the railroad might be running some test runs of the locomotive in advance, I was able to change my plans and arrive into Durango a few days early. Hey everyone, it's Monday, June 1st, 2026, and we are here in beautiful sunny Durango, Colorado. It's about 9:20 in the morning, and they're apparently just about to do a test run with the 340, so we'll see what happens. The first test run of the 340 had actually occurred on Friday, May 29th. After taking the weekend off, the crew was out again to test the locomotive on a trip from Durango up the grade at least as far as Rockwood. Around 10:30, the 340 pulled out of Durango with a short train. .340's whistle echoed hauntingly through the Animas River Valley as it passed through an area known as Trimble. After a servicing stop in Hermosa, 340 took on the 2.5% grade as it climbed toward Rockwood. A few miles ahead at Pinkerton, 340 encountered a problem. The train backed down the hill to Hermosa for some repairs, and then returned to Durango later in the afternoon. I began Tuesday, June 2nd by catching some of the regular tourist trains on the Durango and Silverton. The busy summer season for the railroad was in full swing, with multiple other train trips scheduled daily. Recently back from overhaul and conversion from coal to oil was K36 type locomotive number 481. This was the 481's first week back in service following its oil conversion. Down at the engine house, 340 was tucked into one of the stalls, receiving some additional attention before attempting another test run. In one of the adjacent berths was Locomotive 346, another Denver and Rio Grande C19 locomotive. 346 was receiving work before returning home to the Colorado Railroad Museum. It was definitely quite a sight to see two Rio Grande C19 class consolidation locomotives together in the Durango Roundhouse for the first time since the 1950s. Later in the day, 340 was out again on another test run, this time running solo. The locomotive went as far as Event Park, just a few miles north of Durango. 340 was turned on the Y and then proceeded back to the roundhouse. On Wednesday, June 3rd, the 340 departed Durango early in the morning on a round trip to Cascade Canyon. I caught the train on its return trip to Durango at the Highway 250 crossing near Rockwood. .340 made a fifth and final test run on the morning of Thursday, June 4th. On this day, the locomotive departed Durango shortly after the second regularly scheduled train. Joining the 340 on this trip to Cascade Canyon was a set of cars that almost looked like a recreated mixed passenger and freight train out of the days of the Rio Grande. Seeing the 340 rip up the Animas River Valley at 20 miles an hour was quite a sight, especially considering that my previous experiences with the locomotive had it running at less than 10 miles an hour around the theme park. With the last test run completed successfully, 340 was ready to pull its first revenue trains over Rio Grande rails in 3/4 of a century. The Durango and Silverton offered tickets for 3 special excursions behind the 340. On Friday, June 5th and Saturday, June 6th, the locomotive pulled round trips from Durango to Cascade Canyon. Departure was set for 9:15 in the morning with a 2:15 p.m. scheduled arrival back into Durango. The Excursion consist featured a mix of passenger cars and caboose 0540. Boxcar 3631 also joined the train for the June 5th excursion. Included in the consist was Denver and Rio Grande Combine Car number 211. This is another piece of narrow gauge rail equipment that the Durango and Silverton was contracted to rebuild. 211 was brought back from a very sorry state of rotting wood and no wheels or trucks to this beautiful piece of craftsmanship that, quite arguably, looked better than it did when it rolled off the Jackson and Sharp Car Company shop floors back in 1881. After the weekend's trips, the car was set to return to permanent display in Lake City, Colorado. It was quite a spectacle to see the little consolidation locomotive working hard up the grades on the former Denver and Rio Grande narrow gauge for the first time in 75 years. The last day of 340's public trips over the Durango and Silverton was Sunday, June 7th. An all-day photographer's special excursion was planned with a departure from Durango scheduled for 7 a.m. and return set for 5 in the afternoon. Rail enthusiasts had traveled from all over the country to see the locomotive on what may very well be its only excursion trips outside of Knott's Berry Farm. The train headed for Rockwood and then performed photo run-bys at 5 different locations. A stop was made at Tacoma to allow the 2 excursion trains to Silverton to pass by. With fuel running low in the locomotive's tender, the train proceeded back to Rockwood. There, the 340 would be refueled and then continue on to Durango. 340 arrived back into Durango, bringing to a close a long, successful weekend of narrow-gauge steam railroading history. Thanks for joining me to see this unique moment in time. As always, a special thanks to all my supporters on Patreon. If you would like notifications whenever I post to YouTube, click on the subscribe button and select the Receive All Notifications option. I'll be back next Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time for a brand new railroading adventure right here on the YouTube channel. That's it for now. Until next time, I'm Mike Armstrong. I'll see you down the line. Thanks for watching.